All right. How's everybody doing today? Quick welcome to our second episode of the Pioneer Performance podcast, as we're calling it to this point. Excited to bring to you a fun interview I did with a local national caliber triathlete, Anastasia Livesay. So Anastasia came to us earlier this year and completed a couple of lactate tests for both the bike and running. So we had a great, about a 40-minute chat covering topics around her training, what her goals are moving forward, and hoping to reach and achieve her professional license in the next year. The adjustments she's had to make due to COVID and all the challenges that we're dealing with now, her injuries that she's been dealing with lately, and just how it's affected her ability to train, and also the benefits from having to take some time off and kind of readjust and reset herself moving forward into a new competition season in 2021. We'll cover a little bit on nutrition and strength training and her background as a rower and how that led to her trying triathlon for the first time in her early 20s. And she quickly rose through the ranks and has competed at the national level for the last few years. So this was a really fun talk. I hope you get something out of it, and I'm sure you will. And we will see you next time. All right, so we are here with Anastasia Livesay. So I had reached out to Anastasia earlier during the quarantine. She had come to us back in, was it January or February of this year?
Yes, I think so.
Looking specifically for some lactate testing, right? As you were prepping at the time for some international competitions, was that right?
Yes, I was actually supposed to be in Canada a few weeks ago.
Oh man, so yeah, bummer of a year for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. But I thought your story was really interesting, and your path growing up. And you were a rower, right? And then had transitioned into becoming a really high level triathlete, which is a world I don't know a whole lot about. So I was excited to kind of learn about it more from you and talk about how you kind of make use of, to tie in what we do, the sports science side of things, and how you use that as a tool in your training and preparation, but also just to learn more about you as a person and an athlete, and how you got to where you are today. So if you could, you can give yourself a good introduction here. Let us know kind of, your background, where you're from, and what got you to this point.
Yeah, so to backtrack to the very beginning, I've been an athlete pretty much since I can remember, starting at the age of 3. I think my parents had thrown me right on the ski slope, and since then I've been involved in things like soccer, basketball, lacrosse. And then in high school, I had suffered a series of knee injuries repetitively, and that had caused me to kind of make the transition to a non-contact sport, like rowing. And so I immediately fell in love with it. I became super competitive. I had competed at the regional level and the national level in high school. And then in college, I had rowed at the Syracuse University on the crew team. And so I was there for 4 years. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought that the level was very competitive, and that's something that I really, really wanted going into college. And when I was ready to graduate, I was looking for, I would say, a new challenge and a new goal. I had felt that I'd kind of reached the peak of where I was in rowing. And to be honest, I was a little burnt out. So someone had recommended, oh, you might want to try this sport called triathlon. And I was like, it's funny because a couple of years before it was on my radar and something that I was always thinking about dabbling in, given that I grew up swimming as well. And I'd done a fair bit of biking and running as part of cross training while I was rowing. So when I graduated in 2016, that summer, I had just signed up for a local race and figured, oh, if this is something that I would like to do, then I'll start to become serious about it. And so I did that race on like a borrowed mountain bike, sneakers, like my mom's helmet, my friend's tri-kit. Like it was just super.
And what was the distance of that?
That was the sprint race.
Okay.
So that is a 1/2 mile swim, a 13-mile bike, and a 5K run.
Okay.
After that is really when I caught the bug.
So how did that first race go?
Yeah, it didn't go as well as well, actually my expectations for that race were just, get through it and just have fun. And, I wanted to see like where I was at and how I would even make it. Like, but the bike was something that I had never really seriously done before. Like I said, it was just kind of just like a cross training thing. So,
Okay.
the swim, I knew I was going to be like pretty good at, which was how I panned out. I came up ahead in the swim and then just got passed them left and right on the bike. Like it was just kind of like defeating, but yeah, I made it through. And then after that, I decided to really go all in.
That's so cool and really interesting. So at that point, you're just out of college?
Yeah. So I graduated
So like
in
22,
May.
23?
Yes.
And I liked what you said there. We talk a lot with parents and young athletes that there's such a pressure right now to specialize in sports. Like you can't succeed unless you start 7, 8, 9 years old and do that all the time year round. And just the way you said that, like, I guess I'll try this sport called triathlon. Just goes to show, like, if you're well-rounded and developed, you can pick things up later and still have success. So after that first race then, so you enjoyed it, obviously, to keep doing it, right? Mm-hmm. So what came next?
So after that summer, which I guess it would be considered like my first season, even though it wasn't really serious, I decided to really go all in and really get serious with my training. And so at that point, I hadn't hired a coach yet because I still kind of wanted to do it on my own and see if I actually could make it before I started working with someone. So my goal for the following summer would be to do a few more races and qualify for the national championships that summer of 2017. And so that was like a really like stretched goal of mine. Like I didn't think that might have been possible in that summer, but that's what I set out to do. And I kind of build my plan around that in mind.
Okay. And did you achieve that?
Yeah, so I ended up racing that summer. It was August, I think, around that time in Omaha, Nebraska. And so since then, I've raced 2017, 2018, 2019, and what would have been 2020 national champs.
Wow. And I saw, a couple of the results I was able to find. Like, so you were at least once or twice, right? Like top 30 nationally.
Yeah, so my my best finish actually was last year at nationals in the sprint distance. I cracked the top 20. And so that kind of informs like my goal, would have informed my goal for this year. Like I really wanted to crack the top 10 and eventually get on the podium and look at the overall winning. So that's still my goal, but it just gets pushed back by a year. Yeah.
So how does that work in triathlon? Like based on your finishes, what opportunities does that afford you beyond like the national level, like internationally? What do you have to do to qualify for those races and get to that point?
So the national champs, the way it works is that there's two races. There's the sprint distance and the Olympic, and you can either race one or the other or race both in the same weekend, which I've often done because I feel like I haven't really picked a distance that I like one over the other. Like I really like the sprint, I really like the Olympic for different reasons. And so normally I race both of them, but in order to get to the world championships for the following year, you have to place within the top 10% of your age group. Okay. And then based on the results, you then can qualify for, say, like the 2021 world championships. And that usually changes location. So in 2018, it was in Australia. So I was at that race. In 2019, last year was in Switzerland. And then this year it would have been in Canada.
Wow.
So that's kind of like I would say the peak of racing at like the amateur level. And then the next step up would be, okay, once you start winning those races and getting the results to then apply for your professional license. Yes.
Elite. Okay. Got it. So you're like, that's right at the level where you are and trying to make that next leap. Is that the next, next goal?
That's definitely my biggest goal long term is to get my professional license.
Great. And like how, so what the racing season was just pushed back for a year at this point. So when do they pick up again?
Yeah. So we kept looking to see what races would pop up. And it was just, the issue was that anything I had signed up for, even locally, had ended up getting canceled. And while there is one race still, excuse me, on the calendar in December, it doesn't look that likely that it's going to happen. And considering it's in
Already that far.
Florida,
Yeah, there's probably so
yeah,
many logistics to work out ahead of time.
logistics, and for me, I don't really think it's worth the travel and putting myself at risk, and especially because we're already thinking about building into next season and knowing that we have those key races already planned. So they had announced the dates for the national champs for next year and the world champs. So we figured it would be best to kind of take a break, reassess, and then just start focusing on 2021.
Okay, that's great. So how, what's a typical training year look like, and kind of big picture, and then how has that changed in 2020 since March?
So normally we would start doing like our base building in end of December, all the way up to around like March and April, and then kind of transition into like more like a race season build. And normally my first race would be around the end of May and June. And race season would go from around June to as late as October. Last year I raced, I think October 5th was my last one.
Okay.
And so this year that kind of shifted because once we started having everything shut down, especially the pools not being open for so long, it was basically, okay, we'll switch back from race prep to more of like a base building and keeping fitness up there enough to say if there was a race happening, I would be able to get ready in like 4 to 6 weeks and be comfortable. But then as the pandemic got worse, we realized, okay, that's probably not going to happen. So we'll keep doing base training and just really focusing on staying healthy and staying consistent. And I actually was dealing with a bit of an injury before the pandemic started. So it was a blessing for me because I had a lot of time to heal and get recovered. And yeah.
That was going to be my next question, actually. Even besides any injuries, do you think there's a silver lining physically in being able to take a break like that and kind of reset yourself and start building up again? Or do you feel like it kind of sets you back in the long term?
In the beginning, when I was more bitter about the situation, I thought this is such a waste. I'm like, I'm not getting younger. I need all the years of experience I can get. But then I talked to my coach and really thought about it in a different way, thinking, okay, you actually have more time to work on weaknesses and become a stronger, more resilient athlete for next year. And historically, I've been a pretty injury-prone athlete just throughout my career, and realizing now that I don't have the pressure of a race or like a deadline, something like on the schedule, and you can really just take more time and be less stressed about it and more relaxed with training, really helped, I think, and it's going to help me a lot going into next year as well.
That's great. That's great. And I mean, the whole training process is so interesting to me for a sport like the triathlon, and especially, for what you described, you're at such a high level trying to crack into that elite category, but also trying to compete at two different distances. How do you mentally and physically prepare for that, one? And two, is there some part of you or strategically, do you think at some point you'll want to pick one or the other to really excel at that? Or do you think you'll be able to do both long term?
I could see myself doing both and managing them pretty well long term. The preparation for this sprint is pretty much the same as the Olympic, like nothing really changes.
Okay.
And when I started working with my coach, we've had structured the program under the assumption that I would be able to do both. So even throughout the race season, I'll race both sprints and Olympics leading up to my A races, which are normally national champs and worlds. So I like the sprint because it's super fast. I mean, it's like you're basically flatlining the whole time. It's like very high intensity. And the Olympic is very similar. It's just like, can we extend that by another hour or so?
Okay. That simple, huh?
I wish, but yeah, I mean, if you think about like longer, what they call long course racing, which is something that I know in the back of my mind I want to try at some point, but definitely not anytime soon, as I really like the short stuff. But that, it's a whole different, when you go from an Olympic to a 70.3, it's a whole different race plan. The training looks very
much bigger jump from those two distances versus the sprint and Olympic.
Exactly. And then even going from a 70.3 to a full Ironman distance, it's just, it can, it's almost, they're almost like two different sports.
right?
Yeah.
They look the
Yeah.
same, but yeah, that makes sense. And to back up a step here, so as you were going through your rowing career, you had mentioned you eventually just got burnt out on that. What do you think led to that burnout, and how do you try to preemptively nip that in the bud with triathlon training, with breaks, or whatever it is you think caused that with rowing?
For sure. I think one of the reasons why I felt that way towards the end is because in college, like I was saying, I'm very injury prone, and I had suffered, let's see, at least 3 tibial stress fractures within the span of a year. And for someone to have that in a non-contact sport is pretty rare. And while I was there, I was lucky enough to have like a really good training facility and really good doctors to help figure out what is really the root cause of it. And I think it boiled down to a mentality of like more is better. So you always have to be doing more training and more hours in order to be the best and make the A boat. And so I think for me, that was kind of my downfall, and that I really didn't find the sweet spot between like having enough training to be really successful and then going that extra mile and getting injured and sick all the time. And so I think that really led to me being like, oh, I need to find something else. This isn't really sustainable. And yeah.
Got it. And you don't have to, go anywhere you don't want to go, but how did you find like the team dynamics and having a coach probably dictate everything for you? Do you think that contributed at all, or do you enjoy that aspect of it versus the individual sports?
Oh yeah, no, I definitely enjoy the team aspect. I think especially being a freshman and looking up to some of the seniors who had been there for so long and they were just so experienced. I really valued that. And the coach at the time, he's no longer at the program, but he was like one of the best coaches in the country. And one of the reasons why I was so interested in that program. So I think it was more or less me getting in my own head and just being so stressed out about having to be the best all the time, and doing whatever it took, for like whether that was being on the water for 2 hours and okay, now I got to go do an extra 30 minutes because this girl is doing it too, so I have to beat her and I need to do the same exact thing that she's doing, whereas now I'm kind of just like, okay, do your own thing and focus on your training versus like what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And it's such a fine line too. And even kind of segueing into a little of the science side of things, right? So many sports at high levels have turned into like this war of attrition where, whether it's from the coaches or parents or just the internal drive of the athletes, they just feel like they have to do more and more. And then the only people that are left in the boat or on the field are the ones that were able to survive all of that. And then that becomes like the model, like, oh, everyone has to do what they did, as opposed to looking at the big picture and trying to see what's best for each individual. So that's definitely a tough line to cross for an athlete or any coach. So, is that something you would agree with and that you've experienced and seen yourself? Does that kind of fall in line with what you dealt with?
Yeah, and even just like like you said, seeing with other athletes too, and my friends who had gone to compete at other colleges for like across like all sports. I think it's tough because especially the Division I level, it's like very competitive and it's a lot of hours put into training, and you don't want to feel like you're letting anyone down. You want to always make sure that you're at like the top of your game, and it's hard to really balance that between like school and then social life. And I think sometimes it can just, really get overwhelming, and you just essentially break down and do more harm to your body than good. I also think that too, even at the younger youth levels now, I see so many programs doing things that high school programs would be doing. And I think it's, in one way, it's good to be competitive, but at the same time, you also want to make sure you're keeping it fun at that age so you don't burn out. And we have, less athletes going on to the college level than we do now.
Yeah, I'll be careful not to get too high on my soapbox right now, but I've had I've worked with a lot of young athletes and groups and teams, and the parents and the coaches can be very tough at that level. And, you're exactly right. you want the kids to have worked really hard, but you don't want them to know that they just worked really hard at the same time at that age. Like, you want them begging their parents to come back the next day.
Exactly.
That's always my goal. And the hard work is like the side effect, or just a byproduct of putting them in situations where they're just really going out and competing and having a great time doing it, no matter what the sport is. So that's a really, really good point you make. So, whether it's at Syracuse or even before, because it sounds like you were at a really high level before as a rower and now into your triathlon training, what tools do you find useful from like in the sports science world? Like, there's so many things out there, so much data you can collect. What do you think has worked for you? How have you seen that technology progress in your sports over the years? So now that's, we're talking like 7 or 8 years since high school through college. And what do you not find useful? Are there any things that you think are not that practical? I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's funny. I would consider myself a data junkie, I guess, and that like I'm so interested in that side of the sport, and I think that nowadays data really informs how we structure our training. And so for an example would be the lactate threshold testing that I did back earlier in the year. We really were able to use that to create, heart rate zones and power zones. And that then informs how we structure our week to week, month to month, year to year training. And I really like how you can measure progress over time. For me, I'm someone who's like very goal oriented. So I can see, okay, this is where I was at last year with my peak power. Now let's see how we improved the following year. And so I think that it's great, but like you're saying, to caveat, a lot of times data can be very overwhelming, and if not used correctly, it just is a bunch of numbers on a screen. And so if you're not really taking out what's important and building it into your training and really capitalizing on it, it's just like I said, just numbers on a page, numbers on a screen.
Yeah. So how do in a week to week or day to day basis, like you get that information using that example with the lactate thresholds, right? And we give you, different zones, like where you hit different lactate levels at what intensities, and the thing with that is, that could be different a week from now based on how you're feeling or recovery levels. Like there's such a give and take there. So how do you make use of that in your day-to-day training? Do you have to allow for more flexibility? How strict are you with like your training zones and intensities after you get that information?
Yeah, I definitely will use that in day-to-day in terms of we'll look at what training I have for the day, and usually we structure the program so that Monday will be like a recovery day, like pretty easy. Tuesday is usually a quality track session and a hard swim. Wednesday will be a hard bike, and so on. And so I'll use that data to kind of inform, okay, we know Monday needs to be easy, so like stay within these zones. And then coupled with how I feel as well, right? Because like you said, the numbers can be relative, and some days you might be pushing 100 watts and that feels super, super hard, and the next day it's like, wow, that was really easy. And so you kind of have to look at the overall picture and then really use that going into your training, like day in and day out.
And with your coach, do you track all that with all your workouts, like your perceived exertion at different intensities, so you can try to witness those trends and see what's progressing and what's not?
Yeah, I really like the platform that we've been using. It's called Training Peaks. And so as soon as I finish a workout, so say for example, it's a run, I sync it with the app for my watch and it gets all the data collected. And then when you go to upload it, it asks you what your perceived exertion was, how did you feel, and you can add in any notes. And so typically I would do that after every workout and kind of reflect on what had happened. So that way I can look back and say, okay, this week, training didn't really go well. But also I wasn't really feeling that great. Maybe I was getting over an injury or an illness. And so I think it's great, like I was saying, to measure progress and see the full picture of things.
That's great. So it sounds like you have a really good handle on what kind of a tool data is and how to make practical use of it, knowing that it's not, you don't want to be just totally beholden to the numbers on the sheet. That's always a challenging conversation, especially for people that really think this is like the gold, the thing they need to get them to the next level.
Yeah.
and same thing dealing with parents or younger athletes. I think that also, and it can be very useful, but it can also, it's a double-edged sword for sure. So have you noticed progression since whenever that, again, January, February, and like your intensities, wattages on the bike or running speeds and how they feel?
Yeah, it was really, I noticed it translating well to the bike. And I think that was because prior to my, my injury, I was really focusing on the bike and trying to get my power up. I wanted to focus on like my hour power. And so having that goal in mind, I had seen a lot of good progression in like my short efforts, so like my 10 and 30 seconds. And then I was actually doing quite a bit of this like virtual racing on my bike. So my bike hooks up to this trainer, and I use this training platform called Zwift, and you can actually sign up for like virtual races.
Oh,
and like
wow.
against, other people from like all over the world, which was really, really cool. And so I started to see like, pretty decent success. Like I would be winning some of the like lower category races, because some of those riders are like professional cyclists and they're just crazy.
Wow.
But I was super excited, and then unfortunately I had my injury, so it kind of set me back a little bit. I was luckily still able to bike throughout that time, but the run, which was another area I was seeing progress in, I had to completely take
Shut
off
down.
for a couple weeks. Yeah.
So and that's kind of where you are now. Is that
Yeah. So now I had let me think. It's I'm like, what month are we in? It's September. I had started to build my running back up, I would say end of June and July. So it was like 6 or 8 weeks of just like no running. Biking and swimming were okay, but swimming was also very limited because the pools really didn't open until June. So it was basically just biking.
You've got the sound there, right? Can you go?
Yeah. I did make it in there in May. It was absolutely freezing. I had a wetsuit. I had like thermal cap. Like it was like 20 minutes maximum, and then your hands are basically like blue.
That's got to be tough. I grew up in the lakes and mountains. I'm much more of a freshwater swimmer than the ocean or sound, but yeah, it looks tough.
Yeah. I agree. If there was a lake nearby, I would totally pick that over the sound. But yeah, so now I'm starting to see progress in my running, since I've been able to be fairly consistent since coming back from that injury.
Great. And now you're prepping. I can't remember if this was before we started recording or after. So now you're prepping for a race that you don't think is going to happen in December, right? And then the races in the spring is what you're shooting for?
Yeah, so mainly now shifting focus to the races in the spring. I unfortunately had another injury last week. This was just totally random. I had a bike crash and ended up getting a concussion. So I think that was kind of where we were deciding, let's just pull the plug and take a break. And honestly, it was now it's forced rest because of the concussion protocol. But
and I'm gonna put in the disclaimer here for everybody watching that we discussed this before recording, and she said she was cleared for screen time and to do this. So.
Definitely recovering. But yeah, so December, I mean, it wasn't really realistic to begin with. It's just given that everything's going on in the world, and so I'm kind of glad, and I think my body was just ready for a break.
Yeah, I bet. So I just lost my train of thought. So with your training, where was I? I have notes here. We'll go to this question here. So what's your training schedule like? One, so how many hours a day? It seems like to me to compete at that level as a triathlete, it's like a full-time job. Is that the case, or do you work also? Like, how much time do you spend training for your events? Do you include strength training or other sorts of cross training? Or I mean, triathlon is kind of cross training in and of itself. What does your typical week look like?
Yeah, so I would say in terms of hours of training, it would be right now. Before this, it was around like 20 to 25 hours of training, and that really would be spread out between swim, bike, run, and strength. I also include things like, recovery and prioritizing nutrition, as well as I do work also. I was working full time, and then I went down to part time to really also focus more on my training. But but yeah, I still think I need to work. I don't think I could completely tune out of it. I think it's good for me mentally, to use your brain in a different way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like the way we structure it, like I was saying, we have a mixture of, okay, we have easy days and we have the quality sessions. And so in order to make sure I'm not just accumulating jump miles and just wasting time, we really make sure to nail those more quality sessions. So that would be like a track session, or maybe hill repeats on the bike, and then just like really hard swim set with like intervals of like 100s, 200s.
And what's your mileage look like, or distance in each of the events overall, like on a weekly basis?
That's a good question. I don't know if I think for the bike, when I was at my peak, I was doing upwards of like 230, 250 miles a week.
Okay.
And that was like in a bike specific block.
Phase.
Yeah. Running, I would say maybe between like 20 to 25 miles. I'm someone who responds better to less volume, but more quality, which
Okay.
I've also learned. It took me a while to learn that over time. Swimming, I'm trying to think of what the conversion would be, but
In meters,
least, yeah, like I want to say 30 to 40,000 meters a week. I actually haven't looked at it in a while.
Okay, so it's like 3 or 4K. Did I do that right?
So per session, I would say per session, I'm usually doing like 4 to 5K.
Okay,
and I'll swim like six times a week, 5 to 6 times a week.
Okay, so that's a lot of time to put in. That's great. What would you say to somebody, maybe like either a young athlete or someone that's never tried the triathlon before? Like how would you even go about starting? Like, would you do what you did, and just sign up for a race and get some borrowed equipment and see if you like it?
Yeah, I think for someone, especially a younger athlete who's just starting out, I would say definitely keep it fun. Don't focus on being super competitive in the beginning, because more likely than not, it could take a while to build yourself up. And there's so many people who have been doing it for years, and to go into a race thinking, oh, I'm going to win right away. Sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. So I would say keep it fun and focus on your own training. Don't worry about what other people are doing, especially nowadays. Like, social media could be such a great tool, but it can also be a bad tool. And if that kids spend a lot of time, they're looking at, oh, look what they're doing, like 20, upwards of 20 hours, 30 hours a week of training. So like, I have to do that in order to be like them. And it's like, you just have to really like focus on what you're doing, and just, you build progress is consistency over time. And in order to be like sustainable in the sport, you want to make sure you're focusing on that like early on.
Really good advice. Yeah, that's tough. Social media is such a slippery slope in all aspects of life right now.
Mm-hmm.
You just see kind of the highlights for the most part, or it just becomes really like an echo chamber. So you just see the people posting what you want to see. So same thing in athletics and sports. I think you follow the people that are doing the things you want to do, and then all of a sudden that becomes all
Mm-hmm.
and what you want to emulate. So it's good to see other perspectives. What did I miss out here? Did I miss anything? Okay, so like training wise now, so you're on a break. How much longer are you going to be off? Do you think you're ready to get back into running? And
I think so originally, before I had the bike crash, we would have probably trained until October and then taken a couple weeks off there. And when I say off, it's never just like sitting around like doing, right? Yeah, it's more of like unstructured training, kind of doing what you want to do with a little bit of guidance. So I would probably say, now that we switched the break to being a little bit earlier, I think mentally I'm feeling more like refreshed and ready to start getting structure and having like a proper program. So I would say, let's see, what are we, end of September? I would say probably like in a week or so, starting to pick back up and just, doing like very, very easy sessions, but making sure that we're getting like swim, bike, run in throughout the week.
Got it. And feeling good coming off the injuries and all that.
Yeah.
I remember what I wanted to ask now too. I wanted to get some details on like the other parts of the supplements to your training. So your strength training, what you do for nutrition, not necessarily like a full diet plan, but like what's your overall approach and prepping for these races or just training in general?
Yeah, so for the strength training side of things, we typically keep a year-round program.
Yeah.
So we'll periodize it based on like where we are in the season. So now that we're going into an off season, it'll be more of a focus. And so it'll be at least like 3 to 4 times a week of getting in the gym and starting out with focusing more on like getting the movements down and then starting to add load over time. And then as we get into the race season, it will go down to maybe like for me 2 to 3 like 3 times is like ideal, but at least two.
Okay.
And then the load will decrease as the training volume in other areas will increase.
So when you say load, like do you mean the overall volume with the strength training, or the actual intensities and the weights that you're using decreases also?
The overall volume. So we'll keep the intensity will stay pretty high.
Got it. That's what I thought.
But yeah, the overall volume will definitely start to decrease.
Great. And is that something you were in sports, obviously, where there was a direct translation, I think, from strength training to performance. So has it always been a part of your training plan, even as a rower and before?
Yeah, definitely as a rower. We were fortunate enough to have like a pretty good strength and conditioning program at Syracuse. So it was built into our weekly routine. And so it would typically be either after a morning practice, or we would have morning practice and then come back in the afternoon after class and do a strength session. Now I would say it's definitely like top of mind and something that I think I took for granted in college, because I've been doing like my own research and just being like really, really interested in that aspect of sport. I find that like, while you may not see a direct translation right away, I think over time, it really helps you become more resilient and less injury prone.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you're in sports where it's easy, I think, to see the fruits of your labor. I've been a strength coach for team sports, but also I worked with the swim and dive team at one point, and they were one of the best teams to work with. One, because they didn't have a lot of experience in the weight room and they were really just open to coaching. But also, I mean, the conditions were almost the same for them every day. So if their times got faster, it's like they were happy.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of external factors. Or with some of the team sports, it's easy to, even if you're doing better, it's easy to, I've worked in some, call it old school traditional sports where strength training wasn't really a focus, and it's easy to put it off to the side or just not give it the credit it deserves, or blame it if things aren't going well.
For sure. I was gonna say, for me personally, I've seen definitely a correlation between like when I was really prioritizing it and the numbers that were as a result. So like my wattage on the bike increase, my run times felt like my easy runs felt easier at a lower pace. So like things were, my swim times are coming down. So for me, it was definitely encouraging and like made me really want to continue to prioritize it as part of my program.
That's great. And what about nutrition? Has that always been important for you, or is that something you picked up later? I know it's something a lot of kids don't really spend a lot of time on, but some do. So
yeah, so it was similar to strength training, where it was always kind of talked about in college, but I didn't really start to take it seriously, I think, until after I graduated. I think part of the reason why I was getting those injuries in college is because I wasn't really prioritizing it. And I think I suffered for a little bit of like under fueling and fell down that path. So I had really started to look at it when I got serious in triathlon, because the demands are so high, and you have to make sure that you're always getting enough to not only fuel yourself in the day-to-day, but fuel those workouts. And so now I think my nutrition is pretty dialed in. It's like always top of mind, especially so, finish a really hard workout, and the first thing to do is like get some form of protein and carbohydrates in. Whereas before it would just be, I'll eat like later or something when I'm hungry.
Yeah. How meticulous are you with the planning, or do you try to just have a loose plan where you know the principles you want to follow and you know what you need to do in the big picture, or do you like really map everything out and prep all your meals?
I think it's a little bit of both. In the beginning, I was very, very like meticulous about it. And I think that can also be a negative, in that, like, if you think about it too much and you overthink it and you obsess, it could take you down a really bad path. So in order to find that balance, okay, I'm like, just think of like the key principles and what you need to do each day, and then fuel accordingly. So for easier days, I don't have to be as on top of everything, and my overall intake could be a little bit lower, versus like the more challenging days where it's like Sunday, like a 5-hour bike ride. Like, okay, you have to make sure you're fueling the day before, fueling on the ride, fueling after the ride, and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, it sounds like you do a great job with the juggling and balancing work and everything that goes into that. It's really impressive. So kind of to wrap up here, like, so you mentioned your next goal is to get to that elite level, right? So if we were to come back and talk in a year, 2 years, 3 years, like, what will you have accomplished at that level that would make you happy with where you are and that that you got to your goals?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing's for sure, I would love to get on the podium at nationals sooner rather than later. I think that's something that I've been thinking about ever since I got serious, even back in 2017 when I wasn't really sure like where I would be going with the sport. And then after that, I would really, really like to get on the podium at Worlds and just, show that my training and everything that I've been doing and the numbers I'm seeing really translate into those bigger races. And hopefully if I do, and then maybe let's look at my professional license, lining up with some of the best people in the world would be a dream. I think for me, I'm someone who's super competitive, and I like training and racing with people who are better than me, because I think it really pushes me to be better. So I think that's kind of where I see things going in the next few years.
That's awesome. And I have all the confidence that you're going to get there with your drive and approach. I'm sure you're going to succeed.
Thank you. Well, it definitely takes a team of people, and luckily I've been fortunate enough to be surrounded by like people like you guys and my doctors and my therapists and everyone who helps make this thing possible.
Yeah, it's so cool to see that too, like how much goes into, it's an individual sport, but yeah, there's so many components and so many things to prepare for, and it's cool to see whatever small part everyone else can play is helpful. It's good to see that. But we appreciate you taking your time today and kind of letting us into your world, and wish you the best of luck with training, and hopefully this COVID situation settles down soon and you can get back to racing and doing what you love to do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, hopefully everyone's able to stay safe, and we're almost done with 2020. So onward and upward.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting 8 weeks here going into November, but we'll see what happens. All right. Thanks, Anastasia.
Thanks.